So let's start this conference on blockchain technology. I'm the director of Center of Mathematical Science and Applications, CMSA. So CMSA was set up about 5 years ago, and it is supposed to be a center for interdisciplinary study that are linked to mathematics in general. So we have many different fields that we are interested in, including physics, including computer science, including business and social science. I did not know what is blockchain about 2 years ago, but then I found out everybody in China was talking about it. And it's probably too hot. And I guess a lot of people lost money on Bitcoins and all that. But I found out the technology is more than just Bitcoins. And it seems interesting mathematically. So I decided to run this conference. I hope we may continue this conference in the future. So I'm not expert in any way, but I get Sergey and York to run this conference. I'm grateful to them. And also many of the staff in CMSA has been helping. So let me turn it to Sergey. You want to? Who's? Oh yeah, sure. I didn't see you. Sorry. So York is going to in charge.
Thank you, Professor Yao, for the opening words. So I have the honor to present our first speaker today, Elaine. She's a professor for computer science at Cornell University, a Packard Fellow since 2015, a Sloan Fellow since 2014, and she has received an NSF grant for her research in blockchain, actually in science and applications of cryptocurrency. And she has been doing research on cryptocurrency and blockchain since 2011. So it's very fair to say that she has been one of the very first academics to step into this field and to look at blockchain technology and the related cryptocurrency through an academic research lens. She's also the co-founder and chief scientist of IC3 and a scientist at Thunder Research. So without further ado, before I forget, very important, Elaine has asked me to let the audience know that she prefers questions throughout the talk. So if you have a question, please raise your hand and just throughout her entire talk. And we'll be probably announcing this on a speaker-to-speaker basis. Anyway, so without further ado now, Elaine, please take it away.
Thanks a lot for the introduction. Okay, I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me. I'll be talking about large-scale consensus, and please feel free to interrupt and ask questions. The problem we are going to try to solve today is called state machine replication. This is in fact the core consensus abstraction that's behind all these cryptocurrencies. It's often called linearly ordered log or consensus, and throughout this talk, all these names mean the same thing. Okay, in this picture, we actually have a classical deployment scenario. We have a set of Google Wallet servers, and they would like to agree on a linearly ordered log of transactions. We care about two important security properties, namely consistency and liveness. Consistency says that all of the honest nodes must agree on the log. Now, the network may have delay, right? So your log could be a little bit faster than mine. This is OK, but at the end of the day, we have to agree. Liveness says whenever I buy coffee, this transaction should be incorporated into all of the honest nodes logs very quickly. It's not like I have to wait forever for my coffee. Now, initially, at first sight, maybe the problem seems a little bit boring, right? What's so exciting about building a linear log? Well, if all of these nodes were honest and they correctly follow the protocol, then indeed the problem would have been trivial. But what makes it challenging is when a subset of these nodes can be corrupt, like they have virus, they have malware, and they can deviate arbitrarily from the protocol. They can do whatever they want. And even under such adversarial scenarios, we want to be able to say that the remaining set of honest nodes must nonetheless satisfy these two important security properties. Okay, so perhaps if you are like me, I got interested in consensus because of cryptocurrency and blockchains. But as it turns out, consensus is not a new problem. It has been around for 30 years. And there's a community who has dedicated 30 years of work to this topic. And perhaps even a little bit more interestingly, if you look at all these companies in the Silicon Valley, actually every company deploys state machine replication. Because you have to back up your computing infrastructure. It's bad to let your critical infrastructure run on a single server. But whenever you have replication, you have this consistency problem. So Apache Zookeeper is like an open source implementation of classical BFT protocol, which implements state machine replication. Actually, Apache Zookeeper has a crash-tolerant version. Okay, now, traditionally, when we talk about consensus, the kind of scenario we have in mind is exactly what I talked about, right? There's a single organization, there's a dozen nodes, and these nodes are interconnected with fast local area networks. So this is like on a small scale. And what's really so exciting about cryptocurrencies is that they proved empirically for the first time that consensus is actually possible on a really large scale, over the internet involving thousands or maybe even millions of nodes. And well, as it turns out, consensus on a large scale in a decentralized environment is much more challenging than in the classical setting. There are various challenges that we have to address. Okay, so for instance, one of the biggest challenges is scalability, which I will actually focus on in this talk. And also when we were working with consensus, we realized we need to rethink the fundamental mathematical modeling, like the models with which we study consensus. So if we have time in this talk, I can cover some of this in the second part of the talk. And then, of course, I think one of the most exciting challenges in the decentralized environment is incentive and economics. Like we have to incentivize people to participate. And not only so, we have to incentivize them to participate honestly and with fast performance. Okay, but this part I won't have time to cover in my talk, but I noticed there's going to be a few talks by economists later during the day, so they'll probably cover the third aspect. Okay, so I will start by focusing on the scalability challenge. And to describe how bad the situation is, here's a very good picture to look at. This is a chart showing Ethereum transaction fee over time. And if you look carefully, there's a peak in December 2018. Or is it 17? Yeah, December 2017. How time flies. And this was when CryptoKitties came about. Have you guys all heard about CryptoKitty, right? It's a collectible game, and you can breed kitties, and some of the rare breeds would sell for maybe 100K USD or something. And this is really a toy game in comparison with the social network games, the mobile games, because they have really tiny volume. And yet this single game alone was sufficient to overload the entire platform. Okay, so essentially, we really have to overcome the scalability challenge for these platforms to be able to do anything useful. And if you look at a lot of these blockchain startups and ICOs, everyone's kind of racing to create the so-called dream large-scale consensus protocol. Okay, so this is also what I want to talk about in the first part of the talk. What is the dream large-scale consensus protocol? And why, even after 30 years of work in this space, we still don't have the dream protocol, right? So that's also a bit strange. Okay. So before I talk about our protocol, I want to just take a small digression, because maybe some of you haven't looked into consensus a lot. I want to quickly paint a very broad landscape for distributed consensus. It's going to be very, very high level. So broadly speaking, there are two classes of approaches towards consensus. There's the classical approach, and they're represented by protocols like PBFT or Paxos. Right? If you have worked on distributed systems at all, you should have heard of these names, Paxos, PBFT. And then the modern, has more attractive, more exciting approaches, blockchain. So what do we know about these approaches? For classical consensus, if your network has abundant bandwidth, like you have a small scale deployment, and then these protocols are relatively fast because you get confirmation in constant number of round trips. The round complexity is small. Okay, now these protocols are known to be very complex, which makes it difficult to implement, to do security audit for operational maintenance. And there are other drawbacks with classical, like they have poor bandwidth scaling. They don't really work in a decentralized environment when you don't know how many people are going to show up. Okay. So the modern approach, like I said, is blockchains. And the first blockchain-style consensus protocol is, of course, Nakamoto, right, which is the core consensus protocol behind Bitcoin. And these protocols are extremely simple because the protocol rule is simply everyone looks for the longest chain and tries to extend the longest chain by mining the next block. So easy to implement. These protocols have new robustness properties that these classical protocols don't have. And we are actually now able to mathematically articulate some of these robustness properties. But that's actually not a topic of this talk because I want to focus on scalability. And the main drawback with blockchains is that they're very slow, right? Like for Bitcoin, the block interval is 10 minutes. You have to wait for like 6 blocks to get enough confidence, so that's easily an hour. And it's not like you can aggressively parameterize the scheme to make the block interval very, very small because now there's mathematical analysis of these blockchain protocols, and you actually have to parameterize the block interval to be some constant times the maximum hour delay for the protocol to maintain its consistency property. Okay. And I mean, one exciting thing I want to mention, like what's amazing about blockchains is that they're not just an empirical success, they're actually a theoretical breakthrough. So now we actually understand how to mathematically analyze these protocols. And if you look at the mechanism through which they reach consensus, it really fundamentally departs from these classical protocols. But this is also not the topic of this talk. There are a couple of papers you can read if you are interested in this. Right? This is something else that I won't be able to cover in this talk, and the energy waste, right? Everyone says blockchain proof of work is wasteful, but I just want to quickly mention that we have other works that shows how to overcome this problem. Like essentially, you can take something like Nakamoto, replace the proof of work with other assumptions like proof of stake, and with some careful modifications to the protocol, you can pretty much maintain the same stochastic process as Nakamoto. But this doesn't fix the slowness problem. If it's a blockchain-style protocol, it's still going to be slow. And then in the rest of the talk, whenever I mention blockchains, if you don't like proof of work, you can assume like it's a proof of stake blockchain. Okay. So this is pretty much the landscape. And again, the question we want to address is the dream protocol for large scale. So I will start by explaining the good parts of the classical approach. And at some point, we are going to get stuck. And when we get stuck, we are going to try to combine the best of both worlds to get the, what I believe to be the dream large-scale consensus protocol. Okay, so now, this is the scenario we are going to work with. The guy in the middle, does anyone not know him? Okay, he is going to be our leader, our proposer in this consensus protocol, and then the other guys are going to be committee. Right? So in a cryptocurrency system, like the committee and the leader can be elected through stake. We are going to assume this election process has already been done. So at some snapshot, we have these people as the committee and this guy as the leader. Some of these people can be corrupt, like in this case, Loki is corrupt. The leader can also be corrupt. So I will start by describing an extremely simple protocol. And we can together think about what properties this simple protocol achieves. Okay, and here's the very simple 3-step protocol. First, the leader or the proposer is going to propose a transaction. In practice, you always want to do some batching. You want to propose a batch of transactions at a time, right? Sometimes this batch is called a block. For convenience, in this talk, I'm going to assume we confirm one transaction at a time. So the leader proposes a transaction. It's tagged with the sequence number. The sequence number is going to determine where in this linearly ordered log this transaction is going to land. Okay. So once you receive the proposal, you are going to vote. And a vote is basically a signature on the proposal. If you are honest, you are going to vote based on what you receive, right? In this case, you receive a golden transaction, and therefore you cast a golden vote. But if you are corrupt, you don't have to follow the protocol. Like in this case, Loki didn't vote for the golden transaction. He voted for like 2 others. He also doesn't have to vote uniquely. Okay, step number 3. Once I voted, I'm going to wait. And I wait until the moment I receive 3/4 signatures from the committee. And at this moment, because many people have voted for the transaction, I have high confidence, and I'm ready to confirm the transaction. Okay, so basically, the protocol gives you finalization, let's say, in a couple of round trips. Very fast. And the most important thing to remember about this protocol is that, so by the way, I'm going to call a collection of 3/4 votes a notarization. So this is the terminology. And the most important thing to remember about the protocol is that the honest nodes are going to vote uniquely. This means that for every sequence number, you are going to vote on the first proposal you receive, and only that proposal. You won't vote for anything else, even if you receive other proposals. And I can give you a very simple consistency proof based on this invariant. And the proof works as follows. In this scenario, consider that, let's say, one of you has received 3/4 votes for the blue transaction. And let's say some others have received 3/4 votes on the golden transaction. Okay, so now some of you have confirmed the blue, some of you have confirmed the golden. And what I want to prove here is that the blue transaction must be the same as the golden. And I need to make some assumptions to prove this, right? And what I will assume is that majority of the nodes are honest. Majority of the committee are honest, and only minority can be corrupt. Okay. Now, let's consider the set of people who have voted for the blue and the set of people who have voted for the orange. And the intersection of the two sets must be pretty large, right? Because there are only n nodes in total. And this intersection must contain a half n node. Now, if the adversary controls less than a half, it means there must be an honest guy in this intersection. And remember what I said about the honest guy, right? He's going to vote uniquely. And this basically forces the blue transaction to be the same as orange because of that honest guy in the intersection. So very simple argument. Any questions? Okay, so now let's think about the properties we can get with this very simple protocol, right? What I proved to you just now is that if there's honest majority among the committee, we have consistency. And remember that the consistency proof didn't rely on any assumption about the leader. Like even if the leader is corrupt, we still have consistency, right? So now when do we have liveness? We only have liveness if 3/4 of the people are honest and online, and the leader has to be honest and online too. Like for instance, if the leader crashes, he doesn't propose anything, obviously no one will vote on anything and there's no progress. And if the leader is corrupt, let's say he proposes different transactions to different people, then everyone will end up voting for a different transaction and none of them will collect enough votes. And at that point, the protocol can also get stopped. So now if you reflect on this, for this protocol, the liveness condition is stronger than the consistency, right? And in particular, what's particularly bad about this protocol is that liveness depends on a single guy. Like if the single guy crashes, he can shut down the whole protocol, the leader. And that's what we don't want. So let's ask the following question. How can we get rid of this stronger condition that's needed for liveness? In particular, we want to achieve consistency and liveness under the same set of conditions, namely under honest majority. Okay. So the idea that we have, our protocol is called Thunderella, is that we are going to use what's called the slow chain. And you can imagine the slow chain to be Ethereum or Bitcoin's consensus, but it can also be proof of stake blockchain. And the slow chain satisfies both consistency and liveness under honest majority. Like it can be honest majority in computation power or honest majority in stake. Now, if the fast path, if this voting protocol ever fails, we are going to fall back to the slow chain and to perhaps try to figure out how to fix the problem. And one way we can fix the problem is to switch to a new accelerator, or maybe re-elect the committee. Okay, I will explain how this paradigm works, but here's a little bit of terminology. I will call this voting protocol fast path, because in the fast path we confirm transactions like in constant number of network round trips. It's very fast, and then I will call Ethereum, Bitcoin the slow chain. And before I go into the technical details, like one attractive feature for this paradigm is that we have both the decentralization and the performance, right? Because we are getting the performance from the fast path, whereas, even if the fast path fails, we always have this decentralized slow chain to fall back to, and that's why we are getting the decentralization from the slow path. Okay, like the single guy, this leader, although he can shut down the fast path, he cannot shut down the protocol. Okay, just also, this is a small digression. If you compare Thunderella with classical consensus, there's a little bit of similar idea. Like in classical consensus, there's also this voting path, but typically they have to do multiple rounds of voting to get amplified properties, because they take a more complicated fallback mechanism. But in most of these classical protocols, the most complex part is in this recovery path, and they are sometimes it's just like frustrating to implement this very sophisticated recovery path. And there's, for instance, a company in San Francisco. They're rolling blockchain solutions for Visa. It's called Chain.com. And what they did is like they basically completely gave up on implementing the recovery path, and they only have this voting protocol running. And this means like if, for instance, this voting protocol ever shuts down, they have to manually fix the problem. Like they have to basically manually do all this complicated stuff. And if this protocol is deployed, let's say among 100 banks and 1,000 nodes, doing this is going to be like a huge effort. Okay, so I'm just going to describe how the Thunderella paradigm works. And to make this paradigm work, we just have to solve two questions. One is that people need a mechanism to detect when the fast path has failed. So detection is number one. And when you have detected failure, you want to do the fallback. And it turns out there's a little bit of trickiness for the fallback. So I will then next describe how to do the fallback. Okay, so first, how do we detect fast path failure, right? So let's say the leader is misbehaving and causes the fast path to shut down. Or maybe just not enough people are on. There's only majority people honest and online. There's not 3/4, in which case the fast path will also shut down. Okay, and here's a very simple mechanism to achieve this goal. Every now and then, the committee will compute a hash of the fast path log so far. Okay, and then we will assign this hash. And when this hash gains 3/4 votes, it becomes notarized. And the notarized hash is called a heartbeat. Okay, so now we will periodically post these heartbeats to the slow chain. And under normal conditions, the heartbeats should keep beating, right? And the heartbeat, by the way, also serves as a checkpointing mechanism, because this hash is cryptographically binding to the fast path log. If at some point I discover that k blocks have gone by without a heartbeat, like you can use the chain growth property of the blockchain to measure time. And this k is chosen, this k is a security parameter. And for Ethereum, you can think of it as 300. For Bitcoin, you can think of it as 6. In particular, the underlying blockchain's consistency has a failure probability that's exponentially small in this k. So as long as you choose k to be big enough, the failure probability of the underlying slow chain can be made as small as, for instance, encryption failure, or signature failure, like which these protocols make use of anyway. Okay, now, so something must be wrong, right? Maybe the leader has crashed. Maybe he's trying to censor transactions and the committee are unhappy and they refuse to vote. And no matter which case, the fast path will shut down and we want to invoke the fallback. The fallback, it seems kind of simple, but actually there's one thing that's slightly tricky because of this network delay. Like on the fast path, in this case, Spider-Man's network is a little bit slower and Iron Man's network is faster. When Iron Man wants to fall back, he has 6 transactions confirmed on the fast path. But when Spider-Man wants to fall back, he has seen only 3 transactions notarized on the fast path. So now they have to kind of resolve this discrepancy, right? And during the fallback, what they're going to do is that they will post all the notarized transactions they have seen to the slow chain. And these green blocks are called the grace period. And the grace period is like a, also k number of blocks for the fallback to complete. And in fact, you don't have to post all the notarized transactions you have seen. You only have to post it since the last checkpoint, the last heartbeat. Okay, so after this grace period, if you look at the underlying slow chain, this prefix is going to contain all the notarized transactions every honest node has observed before the fallback started. This is important because you don't want any rollback. Like before the fallback started, if I've already told Zhiguo, you can ship the Ferrari. You don't want this transaction to roll back after the fallback. It has to be incorporated. Okay. So now at this moment, the fallback has completed, and people can now, for instance, vote on the slow chain to decide who should be the next accelerator, or maybe they can decide how to fix this problem. I mean, they can also continue to confirm transactions on the slow chain, but you don't want to be stuck to the slow chain forever. Okay, you want to kind of rebootstrap the fast path. Okay, so under optimistic conditions, like which should be almost all the time in practice, we can confirm transactions on the fast path. And on the fast path, right, and I want to stress that when you're operating on the fast path, you don't have to post much data to the slow chain. The only thing you have to post to the slow chain are these tiny heartbeats every now and then. Okay, so you're not subject to the slow chain's bandwidth on the fast path. And when things don't go so well, it's not the end of the world because we always have the slow chain to fall back to. And even in the worst case, we get the security and performance of the underlying slow chain and the decentralization of the underlying slow chain. Okay. So we've kind of, earlier we had consistency under honest majority and we had liveness under the orange set of stronger conditions, but now we have modified the picture, right? We have consistency and liveness under the yellow set of conditioning, the weaker conditioning, and we are fast under the stronger optimistic conditioning. Yes. I think actually I have a part of the talk which may address your concern, and I will also try to talk about it a little bit. Let me hold on to that question. But this is a really good question. Okay, so now just quickly recap, like the protocol is extremely simple. If you want something to remember by, so you can reconstruct the protocol yourself, right? Here are the 2 sentences to remember. When things are good, confirm transactions with a single round of voting. And when things are not so nice, use the slow chain to fall back. In the paper, obviously, we have a lot more details. Like I didn't really cover all the math and the formal modeling and the proofs. And that's really the heavy lifting, like the talk, and makes it sound easier than what it really is. But writing the paper was a lot more painful because we have 74 pages of mathematical formulation and proofs. So let me kind of talk about the deeper insights we have gained and try to address Zhiguo's question. So this was the picture I showed, classical versus blockchains. Yeah. Okay, so let me kind of talk about this asynchronous versus synchronous and try to get to the question that Zhigo asked. So the question was, why is there anything fundamental to the slow chain that the slow chain must be slow? And what is the maybe more fundamental reason why the fast path protocol can be? Is this the, okay, good. So if you look at all these classical protocols, the ones people have implemented in practice, they're all in the asynchronous or partial asynchronous paradigm. So for the purpose of this talk, I'm going to use the word asynchronous and partial asynchronous interchangeably. Okay, so what is an asynchronous protocol? An asynchronous protocol is one in which the protocol is unaware of the maximum hour delay. So you can think of it as a universal protocol. The same protocol has to give you these security properties no matter how large the hour delay is. And because the protocol is universal, that's why designing such protocols becomes more challenging, and these protocols often are more complicated. And what we have here is actually, we have a synchronous protocol underlying in the recovery path. So that's a fundamental difference between all these classical approaches like PBFT and Paxos. And so why is blockchain a synchronous protocol? So unlike asynchronous, a synchronous protocol knows the maximum hour delay. And it only gives you the security guarantees when your network really respects that delay. So like if you have a blockchain protocol, like I said, you cannot set the block interval to be too small, right? You have to set the block interval to be large enough with respect to the maximum hour delay to get security. And this also says that the protocol must be aware of what the maximum hour delay is. Okay, so that's one reason why blockchain type protocols are fundamentally slower. They have the synchronization parameter, but actually there's another reason which perhaps can be overcome. Like the issue is that if you have a protocol like Nakamoto, like in between these 10-minute block interval, like I send a block and then I send another block, and in between the network is doing nothing. So the bandwidth is not being effectively utilized. Okay, but that we have some other work that shows how to make simple modifications to the Nakamoto protocol to overcome that problem. But it still doesn't overcome the problem that the confirmation delay has to be large, because the confirmation delay there has to be security parameter like 6 times 10 minutes. Okay, now what's very interesting is like if you look at all these implementations Google, Facebook have, right? They use the asynchronous paradigm because classically maybe the belief is that synchronous is slow for this reason. And if you are Google, Facebook, you'll know that you want microsecond latency. And what we kind of show is that this insight is not 100% correct. Because if you look at Thunderella, interestingly, we are actually fundamentally a synchronous protocol, but most of the time we are actually operating on the asynchronous path. So that's why we can't get the fast of the asynchronous and the simplicity of the synchronous protocol. Okay. As it turns out, this also is a new theoretical paradigm because classically we know if you want asynchronous, you have to live with worse resilience. Like any asynchronous protocol cannot tolerate more than 1/3 corruption. So classically, the belief seems to be that if you want to be fast, you can only tolerate 1/3 corruption. And we also show that this is not the case. Like for instance, Thunderella can tolerate minority corruptions, and we are still fast almost all the time. So that's another interesting theoretical point. Okay, so this is kind of the first part of the talk. There's not a lot of time left. How much time do I have? Okay, so I'm going to try to talk a little bit about this mathematical modeling aspect. I don't think I will have time to cover a lot of details, but I hope maybe to get us to think about these more fundamental mathematical challenges. And the first thing I want to tell you is that, okay, maybe I have cheated. I'm going to tell you what's actually a flaw in Thunderella. And it may seem pretty alarming. Actually, when the engineers in our company are implementing the protocol, they pointed this out. Okay, so I will describe to you a scenario, in which everyone's actually honest and benign, but people just crash in a specific pattern. And in practice, what this will happen, this will lead to is, let's say, a confirmed transaction will get undone. Okay, this seems pretty alarming. And initially it seems mind-boggling because we have 74 pages of proof, and how can the protocol be flawed? And as it turns out, it's not a flaw in the proof, thank God. It's a flaw in the underlying model. So then we show how to fix the model to get these new robustness properties. Okay, so here's the flaw that our engineers pointed out to me. Imagine now one of the committee members is Coinbase. The same scenario as before, the same protocol. Accelerator sends proposal, everyone votes. Okay, now, here's the crash scenario. At some point, the accelerator sends a notarization to Coinbase. Okay, so Coinbase now is the only guy who has seen the notarization. Okay, at this very moment, the accelerator crashes. So the lead, I often call the leader accelerated because in some sense, the leader is untrusted and his only role is accelerating the protocol, right? So when you hear accelerator, it just means leader. Okay, now this guy crashes. And I mean, of course, Coinbase believes the transaction to be confirmed. So he tells Andy Yao to ship the Ferrari. My student gave the talk in the winter school with Andy Yao. That's why he's there. And so Andy ships the Ferrari. And at this very instant, let's say Coinbase crashes as well. Like maybe the network gets DDoS, or the egress router is somehow acting up. Okay, so what's going to happen at this moment? Everyone's going to fall back to the slow chain, and everyone will try to post all the notarized transactions they have seen to the slow chain. And Coinbase will try the same. Like Coinbase also noticed there's this fast path has stopped. But because he is cut off from the network, he fails to post this notarized transaction to the slow chain. And the effort fails. And when Coinbase eventually comes back online, right, he fixes the network problem. It's too late because others have already completed the fallback, and there's no more time to post notarized transaction to the slow chain. So now the transaction is effectively undone, and Andy is very sad. So how can this be? Right? This seems really alarming. Like the whole point of consensus is to make sure that this never happens. Well, as it turns out, it's not a problem with our proof. It's a problem with the model. Like when you use the classical synchronous model, once a node has crashed, this node is labeled corrupt. And the protocol doesn't try to guarantee anything for corrupt nodes. Like, why do we care about guaranteeing anything for corrupt nodes, right? But the point is, like in practice, sometimes you just have unstable network connection, and you only have a temporary outage. Like, you shouldn't be penalized in this case. And you shouldn't just be labeled as corrupt. Like, we shouldn't give up on you. Okay. So that's why we have this paradox. And the classical model essentially permits flawed protocols. And the practical implication of the flaw is actually pretty serious. So I think what I won't have time to cover is essentially how we fix all of this, but I'm just going to quickly note that I'm going to quickly mention this new model that we have, which is a refinement of the classical synchronous model. So you can think of a protocol that's secure in our model must be secure in the classical synchronous model, but not the other way around. In other words, our model is capturing desirable robustness properties that the classical synchronous model is not capturing. So in some sense, the classical model is too coarse-grained to capture the kind of robustness properties you care about in practice. So specifically in our model, like in classical synchronous, we have honest and corrupt. But now we have three categories. We have honest and online, we have honest and offline, right? Maybe my Wi-Fi connection is bad in Boston, but I'm still a conscientious person, right? So then I'm in the gray camp. And then there's the real corrupt guys. And for those corrupt guys, we don't care about guaranteeing security properties for them. But we do care about guaranteeing consistency among the green people and the gray people. And to make the model, hold on, I'm going to skip through this. To make the model a little bit more challenging, we also capture network churn. Like, because if you have a long-running protocol, it could be the case that everyone is offline at some point. Like, because if you want to maintain a system to have 100% uptime, that's extremely challenging, right? As we know, even Gmail has outage every couple of years or something. So it could be at some point of time, everyone at some point of time has an outage. Specifically, I like to think of this as the lazy co-author model. Okay, so here's a scenario that perhaps everyone's more familiar with. These are my friends. These are my theoretician friends. So imagine they get together and they decide to write a paper together, but everyone's kind of lazy. Maybe they're secretly hoping that their co-authors will do other work. So on Monday, some people are online. On Tuesday, some other people are online. And on Wednesday, some other people are online. Okay, and we want to be able to write a paper in this way and still be able to guarantee that at the end of, and before we, before the conference deadline, when we submit the paper, every honest co-author needs to have the same theorem in mind. It cannot be the case that, we end up believing we have different theorems for the paper. Okay, so we want to be able to also make progress and make the paper deadline. Okay, so now if you're online and you send a message, the people who are online in future rounds can receive the message. But whenever you're offline, the messages you send can be erased or delayed arbitrarily. And you may also be receiving only a selective subset of the messages sent by other online nodes. Okay, so this is the new model. And essentially, we have both theoretical results. I'm going to skip how to fix this problem, but we show how to actually design both. We first show how to theoretically, the theoretical feasibility of achieving consensus in this model. And then we show how to design, how to make this feasibility result more practical and have extremely simple and practical protocols in this new, more robust model. Okay, so just to quickly remind you, in the new model, Coinbase is just modeled as an offline honest node. And then he is not going to lose consistency with the rest of the network. So it resolves this flawed scenario that I talked about. Okay, so I'm going to conclude at a somewhat philosophical note. Essentially, as I said, our model, which we call best possible partition tolerance, is actually a subset of classical honest majority protocols. Like every protocol, if you satisfy this stronger notion of security that we define, it's also provably secure in the classical model, but not the other way around. And in fact, when we looked at a bunch of these classical protocols that are well known in the consensus literature, none of them seem to satisfy our stronger notion of security, which is kind of interesting. It also says, it's very important to have a very good model, because it's not like every natural protocol proven secure in the classical synchronous model has the stronger robustness property. And another interesting point is that in the classical synchronous model, we tend to believe that if the protocol can tolerate corrupt majority, that's strictly more robust than being able to tolerate corrupt minority, right? Like the more you can tolerate, the better. But unfortunately, we show that these two sets of protocols are disjoint. If you want to tolerate corrupt majority, you have to sacrifice this new notion of robustness, this best possible partition tolerance. And it seems like in practice, really you would care a lot more about this best possible partition tolerance. Okay, so this is just saying, in some sense, the classical model can be misleading because it makes us think that tolerating corrupt majority is always strictly better as a security. Okay, so basically, I talked about scalability for the most part in this talk. I touched a little bit on mathematical modeling, and I will leave it to the rest of the speakers to talk about incentives and economics. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elaine. We have maybe time for one question. Anybody up? Otherwise, yes, please.
So this is actually this is a really good question, and that's one important factor that differentiates classical consensus from large-scale decentralized consensus. Because in the classical scenario, all these nodes are running by a single organization like Google or Facebook. But in a decentralized setting, like every player is selfish and they want to maybe maximize their own payoff. And you don't want to just assume honest majority. Like you want the protocol to be incentive compatible, such that every player, when they join the network, their best response is to follow the honest protocol. You want to design protocols that are Nash equilibrium. And actually, we have another paper called Fruit Chains that discusses this challenge. So this was not really covered in my talk. But it's an excellent question.